Welcome to the Rooted in Washington podcast from Roots of Inclusion. I'm your host, Carrie Bossis, and today my guest is Jim Chambers. Thanks for joining me, Jim.
Yeah, I appreciate you asking me to. So,
how could I not? I mean, we're doing a podcast about family engagement, so that's how I got to know you, through your work in that area. But first, could you tell me a little bit about your family today?
Well, today I'm raising my 11-year-old granddaughter. Her mother's not doing too well. And so, my family's pretty separated, to be honest. Not what I expected when I came home from prison after serving 23 years. I expected it all to be kumbaya and everybody's going to be seeing each other and spending time with each other. But, kids grow up and they have lives, and, I'm connected with all my family, but I'm just like still trying to navigate the systems myself. So it's been busy.
Yeah. I'm glad that your granddaughter has you there for her. At the same time, that's not a simple navigation of systems. And you, above all other people, well, among other people, really put so much effort into having the pathway towards a more intact family. So, like I mentioned, I met you through family advocacy work and then your allyship in the Black Prisoners Caucus. Can you share a little bit more about your journey into that work and how you got involved in this kind of advocacy?
So I was sentenced to prison in 1999 to 40-year sentence. I was shipped about 300 to 400 miles away from my family initially, so I wasn't able to have very, very good visits or any of that kind of stuff. So telephone calls at that time were $25 to call home for 20 minutes. So I did a lot of writing letters and like trying to build back my relationships with my kids. And some of my children were very small, so letter writing wasn't really a thing. But luckily, about a year or so into my sentence, I was shipped to McNeil Island, which at that time was like the place where there was a lot of programs and things like that. And I happened to walk in the door at the time when they were starting a pilot program called Long Distance Dads. And I was asked to be part of that program to take the class. It was like 10 men that were asked to take their initial class. And I think 6 of us graduated or 5 of us graduated from the class, because it's really hard for parents in prison to understand the harm they cause their kids by their choices. And like some people don't want to face that. But it just drew me into the work, to be honest with you, because I heard my children have a 7 out of 10 chance of ending up in prison and all these statistics that were given to me about the harm that I caused my kids. But there was other statistics that showed if parents that were incarcerated stayed actively engaged with their kids and had, those supportive relationships, they could actually put the kids in a different trajectory. So I decided I was going to be the parent that did everything he could for his kids. And I moved into the space. After I graduated the class, I was asked to become a peer leader and help teach the class. So I did that for, I think, 13 years. I taught that program inside. Intermittently, there was times where it wasn't teaching, but when it came back, I would always be asked to teach again. Because every class I learned something personally. I learned every man in that room gave me a tool that I could use in my own children's life. And like we created a community within the prison that was like 300 men that were trying to be parents. We probably had at that time, we were doing groundbreaking things. The Secretary of Corrections, Eldon Vale, opened up the yard for us to have events on our yard. Our kids could come in and have barbecues, and we had fire trucks and fly kites and road bikes and all these things that were unheard of in prison. But he was giving us an opportunity, right? And that's a big risk for him to take, but he gave us this opportunity because he saw it would benefit our families. A lot of those programs today are hit and miss at some facilities. They still have some of them. And then at that same time, I was, my kids were journeying through school. And I was like, what can I do to benefit my kids the most? And I think it was for me being involved in their education, right? The caregivers of my kids' moms, they were busy working and trying to take care of the kids in everyday life. And like I could take on the role of helping my kids with homework and doing the things on the side. So I sat down with the superintendent at McNeil Island and wrote a program that allowed parents to do parent-teacher conferences. And I was the first parent to participate in a parent-teacher conference. And, the superintendent brought me to her office to do it because it was such a big deal. We did it in her office. When I was done doing my parent-teacher conference, she goes, I've been doing parent-teacher conferences for decades and never asked the questions that you asked. She goes, where did you learn all that? And it was like, I learned it in our parenting class that we actually teach, the stages of development and all those things that we learn. And so the program just took off, and now it's a statewide program. They're now revamping it, trying to make it more interactive with people. So, I mean, it's just something that the work drew me to it because I wanted to stop my kids from ending up in prison. And, 4 of my kids went to college, and one of my daughters went to prison. But like, it could have been the reverse, right? It could have been 4 of them went to prison and one of them went to college. She got the same tools that everyone else got. And, she still struggles today with addiction. And that's why I'm raising her daughter. So for me, the work just drew me to it because of the way I was impacted. I impacted my own family. And 4 years before I got out, I began to work with the Strength and Families Unit, which is when I met you. I met you once I started teaching the parenting class inside, and I started working with the BPC, the Black Prisoners Caucus, to help with their family programs, their family integration programs, and their legislative committees to help teach folks about what was going on with legislation around children and all that stuff too. So.
There's so many barriers, and we've talked about them over the years for parents who do want to be engaged, who are incarcerated, to do those things, like the parent-teacher conference, to get the supports. I mean, years ago, I was a law professor, and I was in North Carolina for one of my jobs, and I was going and meeting with people who were incarcerated at the maximum security facility for men and then the one for women. And I saw a big difference in the programming for men and women. I felt like the women's prison, and this is not to make anything sound like it was a good life experience, but the women's prison was more oriented at that time in offering parenting programs and thinking about reintegration with community. And I did not see that at all for the men's prison. And so I'm wondering, and we know that those programs here in Washington have struggled over time, and there have been various limits on them. What do you think made the difference back then for saying, okay, was it Eldon? Was it others? Was there a secret sauce?
I think Eldon had the courage to first, and there was also Alice Payne. She was a superintendent that came from Purdy, which is a women's facility out here in Washington. Mm-hmm. She came to McNeil at the same time as Eldon was our, the Secretary of Corrections. And she saw that the programs were a little different for men too. And like, she wanted men to have as much value in a child's life as the women were getting. And not to say anybody's programming is what it should be in prison, because I don't believe that that's true. And I think the women's prison now is probably one of the worst places for programming currently in our state. And they get the least amount of visits, literally, like they have the least amount of support. Like men have their wives and their kids and all these people. And usually the women in Purdy are getting visits from their moms, because men aren't hanging out with women when they go to prison. They're leaving. And it's a whole different dynamic over there. But, they all have their issues. And I think that, parenting is universal, whether you're a mom or you're a dad. And if you're incarcerated, for me, like if the person that's raising an incarcerated parent or incarcerated child who has a parent that's incarcerated, if a person is raising them, they should know the risk that this child is in, just due to the fact that their parent is in prison. And I think that there needs to be an education piece around that too. Like the parent that's raising these children, whether it's foster care parents or kinship care parents or whoever, they should understand the risk that these kids are in. And I believe that most of them, if they care about the child, would, if it's no harm to the child, allow that parent in prison if they knew it was going to reduce the risk for that child, to allow them to be involved. And so for me, like there's a whole bunch of education pieces that need to go on, and the barriers, as far as the barriers go, like phone calls are very expensive. Prisons aren't built on I-5. They're like, way off the beaten path. They're not by the urban areas where most people come from prison. I think we have one prison left in Monroe up here that's probably the closest to any of the major cities. Travel is a problem because most people in prison come from poverty. People that are raising these kids are really struggling. And so to make them pay $3 for a phone call for 20 minutes, video visits cost money. Like there's nothing free. I mean, I don't want anyone to believe that anything that you get in prison is free. We pay to use every service. We pay for our medical. We pay a $4 fee to go to the doctor. We pay for our gym. We pay for recreation. We pay for everything. And the visit room food. I mean, it's $7 for a peanut butter and jelly sandwich to feed your child while you're visiting. So you drive 3 hours. You want to visit for the 8 hours. So like it's costing you $100 bill to feed people while you're in the visit room. there's a lot of barriers, and a lot of it's around cost. And Washington does have some programs for travel, and they'll give you a gas card or something, I think, to pay some of the gas fees and stuff like that. But it's still very limited. A lot of people don't even know that it's available, so they don't ask. And then, it's the personal relationships that get in the way as a barrier too, right? We have baby's moms or baby's mom's mom who you might have a personal issue over decisions you made while you were committing crimes or using drugs. And like, it's hard to get those relationships healed. I mean, it takes two people to heal a relationship. And I think that's a bit, one of the things we really talk to the men about in classes is like, we have to take our accountability for the state of all of our relationships. We don't necessarily have the right to make amends with everyone until they're ready, right? We can't just force them into taking our amends or, being able to apologize to them. It takes two people to do that. So I think we just give people tools and like encourage people to continue to engage with whoever has their kids, show them that they're making changes in their life, and like move through this process with some grace too. Give people grace, because being angry and doing all the things is not helping the kids.
There are so many barriers, like you mentioned, and even I discovered working in state government that it costs state agencies to email people who are incarcerated through the JPay system that they were using at the time. And so the services that would normally be free for people to access, or there would be a barrier for us, and we all set up personal accounts and trying to, it associate a credit card, our state purchasing card wouldn't work doing that. And we had a hard time even maintaining communication. You had mentioned the homework program early on, but there was really a lot of interest, fast forwarding to right before COVID, for the homework program. And we wanted to figure out how we could help as an agency. And then one of the educational service district's foundations donated school supplies, but even getting the school supplies into the prison was an issue. You and several other people had asked for the informational materials that are available on our website to everyone else who can just access state government websites at the time when I was running the education ombuds. And we had to go figure out, who runs the prison libraries to do that. And then people couldn't find the materials after there was so much time trying to develop that relationship. And I know that one of your passions too was around making sure that people had better access to the parent-teacher conferences. And we found that some of the school districts were really excited about that possibility, wanted to know how they could identify more children who were affected by their parents' incarceration, because there's so much stigma in sharing that. And then we had some mixed reactions, even from people at Department of Corrections involved in family engagement, who said, off the record, well, who wants an armchair quarterback? Those parents aren't involved in their kids' lives. And I think one of the fundamental assumptions, even for people working within the education system or in the correction system or the public, is that parents who are incarcerated are no longer parents anymore. That maybe people are assuming that their rights were terminated or that they just don't give a crap anymore. And that was one of the big impediments, that maybe they shouldn't be parents anymore. But we know that there are all those protective factors in remaining involved, especially when it sucks that it has, that's prison in which you're having a personal transformation, but you're changing and growing, and your kid only benefits from seeing that.
Yes. I mean, we used to make a show of it. Like when we'd have events, when fathers graduated from college or graduated from classes, like we would present their certificates at the event so the kids could see their parents making these achievements, right? Because it sets the standard for the kids. Like if I'm doing this in here, then you're going to have to do this so you can, and like for anyone to assume that a parent is never a parent. My crimes didn't involve my children. Let's be clear. I didn't have my kids with me at the crime scenes doing crimes for my kids. Like I was struggling with addiction and multiple addictions. But I never, I was always engaged with my kids. I'd be at their soccer games or, all their stuff. And so for me, like parenting is universal, man. And you never lose your right to be a parent unless you've done something to your kids, I feel like, to be honest. And 97% of us are coming home. We're not going to stay in prison forever. Like, we will be re-engaged with our families. And, I had a friend of mine that literally wrote his kids for 10 years, wrote his daughter a letter for 10 years every week that went through our program. And when she turned 18, she put in a visiting form and came to see him. She never received one letter. Her mom would tear them up before she got them. But his consistency showed his kids that, like, he'd never forgotten about them. And so he kept a journal for the whole time, writing to him every day, in a little letter thing. So, I mean, for that kind of stuff is like, it's about the kid. It's not about anyone else. So that's what has driven me to continue to do this work in our community.
And if 97% of folks are coming out, they need a network of support when they come out and something to be hopeful for. Because, yeah.
Without community support, we're sending people back into places they don't need to be, And like, my family connections and things like that are what drives me to still to this day to do the right thing and make right choices, right? Because if I didn't have them, there wouldn't be nothing to lose. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, all of that. And you knew it wasn't going to be easy, but you felt a call even when you were still in there to make sure that your granddaughter had a better life too.
100%. I mean, at the end of the day, like, I'm the parent that shows up for my kid, like, telling judges to keep her in jail.
Yeah.
I mean, and it might sound crazy, but like, I know she's safe in there. You know what I mean? And I know hopefully she can get a moment. I was writing letters from prison to judges and prosecutors when my daughter would get in trouble, asking them to keep her. Because at the end of the day, like, I'm still a parent. I'm her parent. And she wasn't happy. She'd come visit me later when she got her stuff together for a while and be like, I can't believe you did that. But like, at the end of the day, like, she's my daughter. And like, that never goes away no matter where I'm at. No one ever wants their kid to be in prison with them. But the sad part is, everyone talks like the system's broke. Our systems aren't broke. They're set up the way they are, and they're working perfectly. So they can capture generations of people into our systems and continue to incarcerate families year after year. And regardless of what people say, oh, they're committing crimes, well, they also live in very over-policed areas. And like, the little white kids get to get a ride home. The little black kids go to jail. That's the way it is, man. So I think that anyone that believes that our systems are broken is got things messed up. It's working perfectly. I was on the yard with 4 generations of men from the same family: great grandpa, grandpa, dad, and grandson, all in the same place. And the only way to change that system is to allow parents that are in prison and allow parents that have children to be engaged with their kids. You reduce that risk greatly for these kids.
Yeah, it's working as it was designed. And that piece, I remember going to Stafford, and maybe it was a youth policy forum. And one of the themes was that people said when they were young, no one asked them how they could help. These were people who were at Stafford, and they said it would have made a difference to just be asked, how can I help? Even if that person couldn't have waved a magic wand, provided housing immediately, changed the fact that a parent was incarcerated, whatever the situation was, but tried, cared, in a genuine way. Like, let's not just add this to a list where people just say, okay, well, then fine, I asked, but try to do something. Just saw that they were really struggling because they didn't have that. And like you were saying, white kids are getting the ride home from whatever. Or maybe they're getting the lawyer to, assist with something, or they're not perceived as dangerous. That's just acting out, kids being kids. But then if you're in a situation that's a total cluster and no one asks how they can help, in fact, they think that's your fate,
Yes.
then it kind of will be.
I I've worked with a lot of men in prison, and the majority of them come from our foster care system. To be honest, like, they remove kids from their parents and put them into a situation that sometimes is worse than the situation they were living in. But I think that children of incarcerated parents get lost in the wash because, one, they don't talk about it with their friends. Most kids are embarrassed that their parents are in prison, or they're ashamed, but they don't know the kid sitting next to them has a parent in prison or in jail. And like, the numbers are pretty high. I believe there's at least 2 kids. I think the numbers are like 1 in 16. So that's probably 2 kids in every classroom that have an incarcerated parent. And like teachers don't know, the parents aren't sharing it with the school system. Most parents don't share that they have kids when they get arrested because they don't want other systems to get involved in their kids' lives. They don't want CPS or DSHS or any of those people to know, even though the kids are living with with one of their grandparents or someone in their family. The other parent that's in prison doesn't talk about having kids. So we don't even really know the real numbers of parents in prison that have kids, to be honest. There's no real hard data on this stuff. But being in prison with people, I know there's a lot of people in prison that are parents, and a lot of people that are, you know, some don't ever admit their parents to anyone in case management or anything like that. So I think that like we have to, in order to really impact our system, we have to make these children of incarcerated parents, their entire ecosystem has to be aware of their situation, right? So teachers, coaches, community, because like the only way we can really engage with these kids is if everyone's aware of their situation. And I think that the people that are raising these kids, if they knew that they could help the kid by doing that, I mean, it'd be amazing. I mean, my kids' school teachers throughout my kids' career were absolutely amazing. They like take my calls, answer my letters, send my homework to straight to me in the prison. Like it was it was like having another parent almost for my kids, to be honest with you, because they cared about my kids. And they would, I mean, they came to visit me. We had an event at the McNeil Island called the Caregiver Event, where we invited our kids' school teachers from the parents that graduated from our class, and we did like a sharing education thing. My kid came with his teacher to visit, you know, my son, and so we did. They taught us about some tests the kids had to pass, and I forget which one it was back then, but they had to pass some test to move on to the next grade or something. And there was just amazing like movement back then, and it kind of went away when the budget crisis hit. A lot of things went away in 2008, 2009, and like those programs have never been restored. Even though we've been spending all this money on stuff, I think there needs to be some more investment in this stuff too for the community. So
Yeah, it should be proactive investment because we know the costs that come later, but we don't see it that way. Even if it wasn't a one for one, that it shouldn't be what's guiding our values and making sure the kids are supported early on. So I'm just thinking about that shame and stigma that comes for parents and for kids. How do you encourage that culture of openness that you're talking about and build comfort to with educators and schools signaling or asking about the status of parents?
well, I think for school teachers specifically, for educators, I mean, I think that like there's almost a code of silence amongst them anyway. So like I feel like you should be comfortable talking to your kid's teacher about stuff. You know, they talk about things all the time, and like these kids are at risk, and like it's worth taking a risk to me to have other kids know that child has an incarcerated parent to stop your child from ending up in prison, man, to be honest with you. Like, I'm willing to take a chance on the school teachers knowing, and because I feel like most of them they wouldn't be doing this job if they didn't care about the kids, right? Nobody gets into teaching because you're going to get rich. They get into teaching because they care about kids and all the things that come with that. So, and for most of the teachers, I feel like when they saw me wanting to be engaged as a father, even though I was incarcerated, they clung to that because dads in the community don't do that kind of stuff.
And now the irony when you're out that you can't even really go into school buildings, right?
Exactly. I can't volunteer at my granddaughter's school, right?
Oh,
I mean, I can't. I mean, to be honest, like there's lots of barriers still with my criminal history, even though it didn't involve any harm to anyone. I mean, I've been asked to volunteer, and I just kindly turned it down because I don't want to deal with the rejection.
that's
And
fair.
every school district, the problem is there's no state control, or there's no, every school board, every school district makes their own decisions on how they deal with formerly incarcerated parents. Some allow it, some don't. There's no standard, and it's a case by case basis in most places.
Yeah, that's the problem. I mean, it's not specific to crimes against children. It's not specific to sexual crimes. It's not specific to certain number of years having elapsed, having clemency, for example. And you went through the clemency process, and you've shared how slow that process can be. What is just, I know that shifting gears a little to the policy piece, but what is the impact of that clemency process on families? in that
Well,
issue of family separation.
well, I think that like not just the clemency, all processes that involve any kind of criminal justice, whether it's a direct appeal or anything to do with the courts, everything is slow. I mean, there's not a single case that moves through the courts within 18 months. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Even if you're right, it takes 18 months to get to the Supreme Court, and then you might wait a year for a decision. But like the clemency process is like probably a 2 year wait once you get on the list. And then it's finding an attorney to help you navigate that, which is pretty hard to do. I mean, they have the Seattle Clemency Project who helped with one of my lawyers. And so, but it still takes a long time to write a petition. You're writing a story about someone's life. You know, you're literally having to write from the time this person was a child until the current day. And like that takes a long time to work through. And the record, you got to file public disclosure from the Department of Corrections, which takes God knows how long they're going to take to give a year public records when you ask for them. So, I mean, there's a lot of issues with clemency and like sometimes, I mean, as we know with justice, man, it's what you can pay for sometimes, right? You get what you pay for in all of our criminal justice systems. And so, but the clemency process for me is a very long process. I felt like I was treated fairly. They did a great job of examining my life from the past and examining my life today. And thank God we had a governor at the time that was willing to sign off on a clemency. I don't know that that's going to be happening anytime soon due to the things that have happened recently in the community with people on clemency. So it's kind of a scary time for the clemency process.
Yeah, and it's such an important process because you didn't need, you didn't need to
Yeah.
be there that long.
Well,
You didn't need
well,
more time being there either. I mean, you had no infractions. You were testifying before the legislature. You're making all kinds of things happen. I know that you start going through the clemency process, or you got clemency, then you got COVID. And I just thought, okay, great. The ironies of the universe. You get
yeah, for
sick
sure.
while waiting.
Yeah, I got December 10th, I was approved for clemency. December 25th, I got COVID for the very first round in 2020 and stuck in the gym with 300 men that had COVID. Like we were living in some giant, I mean, just basically cots in the middle of the gym. Yeah, I thought I was going to die too, to be honest with you. I mean, it was a pretty scary time. I think that like for me, like every process to do with justice is slow, except for when they're trying to get you to prison. Then it goes pretty quick. And on the side, you know, in 2010, I filed a direct appeal pro se, won my case in Pierce County. They dismissed a whole bunch of time off my sentence. I was sent to work camp for 3 years. I worked in the community at like community work crews and things like that, and had basically been earning my freedom. And then I was released on the FOSA CPA program, which is the Family Sentencing Alternative Act. But I was released on the DOC side of it, which is the Community Parenting Alternative. So basically, because I had a child that was underage and that I could prove I would be a good support system for my child, they gave me basically the last year of my sentence on an ankle monitor. I was released on the ankle monitor on June 11th, 2013. On June 14th, 2013, I received a phone call from my CCO, which was my community corrections officer, and was asked to come turn myself back in because my appeal had gotten overturned by the Supreme Court. And basically, they reinstated my entire sentence. So literally, like, she called me, asked me to come turn myself in. And, you know, that was a moment for me where I made a decision that, you know, I thought about all the people that showed up for me, all the people that believed in me, all the people that my children, what example I've been showing my kids. And like those kinds of things is what inspired me to go turn myself in, to be honest with you. I was getting ready to go back and do 20 more years in prison. Like I was free. I was in at the Lakewood Mall when she called me. And I called a friend and said, hey, I need you to drive me over there to the CCO's office. I got to go back to prison. And I'm calling my family on the way to let them know what's going on. It was Father's Day weekend, mind you. My very first Father's Day, I was going to get to spend with my kids. And the CCO, when I got to her office, was shocked that I even showed up, to be honest with you. She's like, I can't believe you showed up. And I'm like, I'm not that person that committed my crimes years ago. Otherwise, you know, I would be on the run right now. You know, she just started crying. She's like, I begged DOC to allow you to stay out, at least do Father's Day with your kids. And we could have picked you up on Monday. It was no big deal. You know, you didn't have to know this even happened. And so that was like a moment in my time where I realized that I was never my worst moment. You know what I mean? And I was capable of making really good decisions. And I'm going to continue to make those good decisions. But a lot of it, Carrie, I have to say, is like there was people during my prison time that saw things in me I never saw in myself. Like even staff and volunteers. I mean, there was two amazing volunteers, John and Sylvia Peterson, who showed up for us to teach the class. They taught the long distance dads class. And then like the staff, like Joan McGurr, Eldon Vale, like people who continually pressed into me to do more work and grow, and like gave me every opportunity to do the right thing. And I think that's really important about our system. We have some good people that work in our systems, and then we have some horrible people that work in our systems. But I think, that's what really changed my life, is because someone saw something in me I never saw in myself.
So heartbreaking to think about the taste of freedom, that phrase, and being out for such a short amount of time. Father's Day, you said be on the run. I can also imagine, and I don't mean to be too dark on a Monday morning, but someone just saying, I'm going to commit suicide. What the hell? Like, why would I live at this point? Because I have been out. I thought I was out. I mean, you can't easily shift that mentality for you to positively say, well, I'm going to not accept this, but I'm going to do this. And I continue to be motivated to get the hell out of that place.
Well, I mean, I went back. That was, like I said, that was 2013. I was taken back to the receiving units that day. I sat there for a few weeks. They sent me back to Stafford, and I got to Stafford like probably right before 4th of July. I think I got there the weekend before that. And, I just made the decision that I'm not going to allow this to turn me into a person that I don't want to be. I'm not going to go backwards. So what I did is I dug in. I started learning more about the legislature, about the law, about all these things. And, everyone told me you should file clemency. You should file. But I'll be honest, I didn't feel like I deserved clemency. I never felt like I really deserved clemency. And I was involved in an accident where someone lost their life, a vehicle accident. So I always thought about the person that I harmed, right? I harmed this person. I harmed their family. I harmed my community. And I didn't want to re-aggravate that harm, right? Because a lot of times when people go before the board or before the clemency board, the victims show up and they're like, man, I can't believe we're doing this again. This is really causing me harm, or this is hurting me. And like, I wasn't going to do that to people. I was just going to do my time, to be honest with you. I was dead set on doing my time. My release date was 2027. And then I talked to a friend of mine, and, they were like, look, what if we can find out how the victims feel? What if they're okay with it? I'm like, look, if you find that out, that's fine. So we went to the prosecutor. We worked through the prosecutor to find this stuff out. The victim's family was like, you know what? If the board lets him out, we'll support it. And that's the only reason I even filed clemency, because and there's a lot of men that feel like that in prison too, that don't go through the process because they know it's re-aggravating harm, and it puts families through so much. I think that like we need to move into a place where victims and people who commit crimes have the opportunity for restorative justice, have the opportunity to go through and like really work on themselves. Because I think, at the end of the day, like victims, criminals, victims, like a lot of times they're growing up in the same neighborhoods. Like there's kids that kill people that were their neighbor, that, for whatever gang reasons and things like that. And like there needs to be more of restorative practices when we go through the courts. The prosecutors have all the power. Our system is rigged, and they get to decide what you're charged with, what your plea bargain is going to be, basically who your attorney is, because you're getting a public defender, all the stuff, right? What judge you go in front of. And so like they give you options, right? You take this plea bargain for 30 years and we're going to give you 100 years if you go to trial. And they over punish people for using the trial process. So if I feel like I didn't commit the crime they said I did, and I go to trial, I put myself at risk of all these other charges that the prosecutor is going to add on just because they can. And it happens all the time.
I think it goes back in a bit to when you were saying that, justice is not swift unless people would like to get you locked up. I actually went to a judge's training this past weekend. I didn't tell you. It is pro tem judge's training. It was 2 days. And I don't know, my family asked me how I felt about it. Like, would I want to do it? It's intriguing to me. I think that, it's high stakes and there's a lot you can do wrong, and that sits on me. But one of the things that came up, because it was for civil and criminal dockets, one of the things that came up was always remind people that they have the right to counsel, because some people will get there and say, I don't want the public defender. One, the public defender doesn't have a lot of time to talk to them. probably doesn't even know how to say their full name. There's just, it's that pacing.
They're overworked.
People end up in the wrong courthouse. Or courtroom. That was another thing that came up. Always verify you've got the right person, the date, because people are being pulled from the jail into your courtroom. But one of the things that people said was that really emphasize that they have the right to counsel, because people will think when they're charged with crimes, if I don't take this attorney and I go pro se, or I try to figure out something on my own, it will go faster and I'll either be out of here sooner, that it'll be held against me. But it's the absolute wrong space to be in, where you don't have anybody and there's no backup plan, because it's not going to move fast. Or if it does, it's going to move fast in the wrong direction. And this is not the time to exercise a lot of self-help.
No, it's not. I mean, I think that like a lot of people, public defenders, there's good ones, bad ones, just like every trade, I think, but I also believe like I'm on the Office of Public Defense Advisory Board. I was appointed by the governor to be on there. And like, so I get to hear like people coming forward with their caseloads. I mean, their caseloads are unreal. For a felony caseload in King County, I think they have like 60 people at one time. And they might have 5 murder cases going. How do you possibly weed through all this stuff and give someone a proper defense? I mean, I think it was Laura Zarowski from the Innocence Project said the biggest thing we can do to stop innocent people from going to prison is give the right defense on the front end. Give attorneys time, give investigators. And like, if we're going to be charging people with horrific crimes, we have to be able to make sure that they did it.
I did appreciate that from this weekend's training. And it was a cross section of people who are willing to do the training, but they were saying, slow down, slow things down to the extent that you can. Not slow things down to keep people incarcerated, but slow down in the courtroom space so that people understand what's happening, that you can explain what's happening. If people's children are there, don't pretend that they aren't, because they're watching you and watching their family. And then just thinking about that in that mix is heartbreaking. But the people who have gone into some of this work have said that what keeps them in is trying to create a better experience. At the same time, there's precedent and there's, certain sense of, well, if you do this, this is what happens, or this is our usual pathway.
I think the biggest thing is they've taken away judges' discretion. Through the criminal process, the judges don't have much of a discretion. There's a sentencing guidelines. If you got this crime with this many criminal history score, your sentence is either 50 months or 100 months. You don't have it. You can go anywhere in between that, but you don't have much discretion to really look at the individual and make a different kind of decision, right? There's some people that deserve more. There's some people that deserve less. The greatest thing I heard one time was a judge from Pierce County. He's on the Sentencing Guideline Commission. And he was talking to a prosecutor and he was like, he says, I see people come before me all the time that when I read the facts of their case, it doesn't even appear like they committed this crime. And they're taking plea bargains to avoid being overpunished at trial. Literally, a judge told me that. And he goes, I'm in fear of turning down their plea and putting them at risk of having to go to trial if I refuse to accept their plea. And so a lot of those pleas are alpha pleas where they don't really take accountability for their actions. They just, they plead the plea bargain out to avoid stiffer consequences. A matter of fact, I just did a judge's training also. I did with Ann Stone from DSHS. We did a training around the bias that incarcerated parents face when they come home in the family court or in foster care. When kids are in foster care, they walk in the courtroom. They're usually not represented by counsel, because usually the mom's getting the counsel and all the services. The dads are trying to get rights to their kids. And that's if it's foster care. But if it's civil legal and they're just trying to get visitation or anything, the judges look at their criminal history and basically just shut them down, or they misfile some paperwork because they're doing it pro se, and they throw their cases out. And it happens a lot in a lot of places. And, if a dad or a mom is trying to navigate these systems by themselves pro se without an attorney, you got to give them some credit. That's a lot of work, and to show up in our courtroom after you were just there and got sentenced to prison, like that is traumatizing to walk into a courtroom after that. whether you're there for good things or bad things, man. It's just reality. And so for parents that try to navigate these systems, they should be given a little grace. I told the judges, you should give them a little bit of grace when they come before you. Don't look at their worst moment, because like people change. I'm here before you today and I changed my entire life. And had I not told you I was incarcerated, you would have never known, you know? So, I mean, I think it's just education. We got to educate people about these people. And we all have implicit bias. You know, I have things that I know my implicit bias. That's why I force myself to grow every single day and put myself in positions that I can be fair with everyone. Because I know I grew up in a racially charged prisons for 25, 23 years, you know what I mean? And like race is real in prison. There's a lot of racist people, or they pretend to be racist. At the end of the day, what I learned by working with the BPC and the API CAG and all the other cultural groups and all that stuff was, you know, we all have bias. We all have things that we go through, but it's being able to see those things and work through them is what's important. And that's what I told the judges.
That's powerful too. When we think about all the ways that people can end up divided, and that reduces their power in that mix. And then the importance of people believing in you, like believing in you for the parenting program, believing in you for asking, for encouraging and asking you to be open to pursuing the clemency. That people that we've harmed can also believe in us or believe in something better, that it's not always just vengeance. That maybe that for their healing, they would like you to be around for your granddaughter and like something to have some closure. And it does make all the difference. And I just keep sitting on that piece of you mentioning that other people who are incarcerated, they often will pause about doing clemency because they're thinking about the harm they've caused to the victim and their family and their community, and that holds them back. Because all the narratives that I see, really, although we watched the other weekend the movie Sing Sing, which was great. But, you know, it's just like uplifting prison musical, but based on a true story. But still, all the narratives that I see are about how people are really selfish who are incarcerated, that you're selfish, you committed a crime, you're selfish for using the court system, appealing this thing. And so it's just another sign of selfishness to go for clemency. And that is how we dehumanize people, because people aren't sitting there going, let me find a way to torture someone.
Exactly. And, you know, to be honest, like someone using their right to file an appeal, if they have a legal right, I think anyone in the community, if you had something going on and you felt there was an injustice, you have a right to seek court relief. If the laws change or things happen along your prison sentence, or you change into a different person, and at some point in your life you feel like you deserve an opportunity to present yourself to someone, you should have that opportunity, right? Regardless of what you did or where you came from, like, because not every victim wants someone to go to prison or serve life in prison. I mean, I've seen women show up whose their children were killed by another young man, and she said, look, I don't want this guy to serve life in prison. I want him to have an opportunity for a life. You know what I mean? And I think, like, if people understood the story of the person that commits the crime, it changes the way they look at them. It's easy to dehumanize someone that the prosecutor's telling you, this is a bad person, he's a monster, he's this. But they don't tell you the kid grew up in foster care, was sexually abused while he was in JRA, like all these other things that happened to this young man along the way. No one talks about that. Most people that commit crimes are victims first. And I don't live in a victim mindset, but like, we got to look at the whole picture. These people were victims of our systems first and foremost.
That part is huge too when we think about the resources or lack thereof for people to do that healing, or for, when you were saying for victims, or for for young people to have supports around trauma, to have functional schools, to have food on the table, to not live in fear that they're going to be the target of a crime. And then that ends up shaping their behavior too. And so you have a lot of people who have been hurt. And I always say, it rubs me wrong with the phrase hurt people. But the reality, because it's just, seems like a bad Hallmark card. But the reality is you do, a lot of people have experienced trauma and other things that weren't attended to by a system. But then the system is very good at punishing people. I know that people have bigger hopes for a system that is more functional, and that things happen outside of formal systems where community comes together and supports people. And if you're coming out of prison, we'll take you, get some clothes, make sure you're fed, make sure you have friends. That's not stuff we can all legislate away, but we don't necessarily put a lot of resources into healing.
I work in the reentry field. I support people coming home. I go inside our prisons today and work with folks. And the thing for me is like, people have to have a community to come back to. Like, if you make everyone an outcast and make everything a barrier for people, you're going to create more victims. So like, at the end of the day, there's no one coming out of prison that doesn't deserve a roof over their head, an opportunity for a job, and to be able to live out the American dream like anybody else. We made bad decisions, but we're not bad people, and we want to be back part of our community. And like, we can't guess. You can never, like, we don't have a crystal ball when people come home. I don't know that this person's not going to commit another crime. I don't know any of that. But what I'm willing to do is put in the work to give them the tools they need to be successful and show them that there's a different way of life. And like, so it's a risk every time, right? There's a risk reward. We see good, we see bad. I mean, we got people that come out of prison, overdose, and die while they're in work release at Department of Corrections. It's all the whole thing. But like, we can't throw out the good with the bad. I mean, there's a lot of people that come out of prison, live their life, and go on with their life, and we never hear from them again. And then we have people that are like on the repetitive door. They go back and forth, but it's because they're never able to get the things they need to get healed from this stuff ever. And like, I just want to clarify. I just really want to make clear, like, I don't believe that anyone's a victim once they become an adult. You start making decisions. And so, but you also have to deal with the trauma that people have suffered. And there's prison trauma too, right? I mean, I got healed from everything. I got healed from everything I did before prison. And then I came home from prison and had to deal with the prison trauma. Seriously, like, someone handed me an iPhone, all this Century stuff. Like, I hadn't made a choice in 20 years. I mean, to go in a restaurant, pick up a menu and try to literally pick something to eat was hard. I would order what everybody else ordered just because I didn't want to have to make a choice. And having the phone on, I mean, I was on Century overload for probably 6 months, literally 3 hours a night. I'd get up, go to work out, go to work, and just be on this cycle of very little sleep because these phones and everything had my brain messed up because I'd never been around that. The whole world was different. I was coming out during COVID. Everyone was wearing masks. Like, it was pretty shocking. Getting on a bus. Like, I got on a bus one time. It took me to the wrong place. I wound up walking 2.5, 3 miles to get to my CCO's office. And I walked home because I wasn't getting back on the bus. But yeah, and then I moved into an apartment by myself out of my clean and sober house and started having panic attacks because I hadn't been alone in 23 years, literally. And I didn't know what the hell was going on. But I mean, I was able to advocate for myself and, get some therapy and things like that and work on that stuff. And, but not being aware of it. And people don't talk about that stuff, right? People come home from prison, they don't talk. Then I went to my buddy. I'm like, hey, why didn't you tell me? Or, this is what happened. He's like, oh yeah, that happened to me too, bro. I've been in therapy since I got out. I'm like, well, why didn't you tell me to expect that? So that I could at least be aware of it, so I could address it. And so now I address that stuff with people while I'm in the prison with them and tell them, like, man, this stuff's real. Like, making choices is hard. Doing these things is hard. And you have to be aware, because when people are aware of things, they can navigate through it because they know what they're going through.
It's interesting. Years ago, when I was doing this study of people who were incarcerated and asking them about their disability experience, the prison system in another state didn't really think they had many people with disabilities. And then the women I ended up talking to shared all kinds of disabling experiences, many of which happened in prison. And they were mostly worried about what their lives would be like when they left. Everything's teed up. Like, of course you want to get out. And they said, I just don't know what kind of supports I'm going to have and how I'm going to manage this. And years ago, the criminal law class I was teaching, the prison in that state invited us to come and tour the maximum security facility, which was its own thing we could spend a long time unpacking. But we went. Some people went. It was not required. Some people went for my class, and we spent hours with the guards. One of my students asked the guards, how does working here affect you? And he said, oh, I've been here for 20-something years. I don't think I'm that affected by it. But then he told us, it's sort of a companion piece to what you're describing, that he would come home every day and he had multiple locks on his door. So he had a wife, if I'm remembering correctly, and his wife thought he was strange. She would go and lock all the locks, then check them again. So hypervigilance. He would pull down all the blinds, even if it was a beautiful summer day. He just needed for it to be quiet. And he also just needed to reduce the stimuli. And so while that was his job that he had done quite proudly in ways we couldn't fully relate to, he was having a trauma response at home. He said he didn't really have that many friends. He was describing things that sounded like panic attacks, but in this very, matter of fact way. But he brought all of that home with him. It wasn't like he got in his truck and turned up the music and, went for a beautiful drive. He went home, he locked himself in, he pulled the blinds down, he tried to keep things pretty mellow until he did it again. And I thought, he's free. And that is not much of a life.
No, for sure. I think it affects both sides of the folks that work in this industry. I don't think one gets less than the other. I think that there's abuse and neglect and harm caused by lots of folks in prison. The fact of the matter is there's bad people there, and some of them wear the uniform and some of them live inside with us. So I think it comes from both sides, but I think the trauma is real for all of them. I don't take away from what they see. It's an unnatural place. You see unnatural things, and having someone tell you to go to your room and all that when you're a grown ass man is pretty wild. Or you're going to eat this food or sit in this seat or any of that stuff. I think that it's going to take a lot of work to change the cultures in prison. I mean, they're just what they are. I mean, we hear about Walla Walla. Walla Walla prison used to be the worst prison in the country and all that. And kids hit the prison yard in a place where they say they're in the worst prison in the country, and they're going to live it out. They're going to live that out. What they read the books about, Concrete Mama and all that stuff about our prison in Washington, Walla Walla, and kids get to the receiving unit, you're going to Walla Walla, and you're forced to do things that you wouldn't naturally do, man. And everybody doesn't deserve to be in places where it's closed custody, right? We have kids that come to prison that are drug addicts or whatever. They're not savages. They're not monsters. And we put them in a position where people are going to force them to either become a monster or get run over. And that's the way our prison system is. It happens all the time.
And it happens for the next generation.
Yeah. And people that are stuck in that miserable place just push it on other people.
That they do. Well, we're in our final couple minutes together, and I'm just wondering, what has been, as a final question, kind of a two-parter, what has been the most rewarding part of your advocacy so far, and what are you looking forward to?
I mean, I just advocated for a friend of mine who just got out of prison after 45 years. I helped him navigate the clemency process. He went to prison at 30 years old. He's now 78, I think, now. Very old man. And, I read his story as he was growing up as a child. I mean, the kid, 7 years old, was in his first institution. His mother went to prison and he went to an institution in Texas where he was sexually abused for years and years and years, and became a heroin addict at 11 years old and committed petty crimes most of his life. And then he was on escape from one of the county jails and wound up being a robbery and shooting somebody that tried to stop him from doing the robbery. He got a life sentence. He took a plea bargain to life sentence. And to see him out now living a life that the guy calls and he's every day is amazing to him. Everyone's his friend. He has all these amazing things going on where he's just grateful to be free, and I think that's one of my greatest things I appreciate the most about advocating for people, to be honest, when I see people get to live their life, whatever that looks like for them.
Yeah. And not until he was 78.
78 years old. And he's, doing his best. He lives on Orcas Island and, goes down and looks at the water and every day, that's what he does. He just had a triple bypass, but I called him last night. He's in the hospital, happy as hell. You know what I mean? It's amazing to see him do that. What was the second part of the question?
What are you looking forward to?
For me, I'm always looking for a way to do more, I guess. I want to be able to actually build a future for myself too. At the end of the day, I don't have a retirement. I don't have nothing. I want to be able to build out something where I can sustain my future also when I get old, so just stay busy working and watching my granddaughter grow up and maybe leave her some generational wealth that she can use to make her life better.
That sounds like an awesome plan and something that you've been dreaming of for a long time.
Long time. I mean, like most people who come from, the systems is like, I grew up in poverty. I grew up, with not much, but I want to be able to leave something better for my next generation, to my family. So
I think that's what families have in common. We forget
yeah,
that, but it's what we all have in common. Why we get up in the morning and do things. It's because of people we love. So thank you.
100%.
Thank you so much for doing this with me today.
Yeah,
Awesome.
no problem. I appreciate you.
Thank you. I appreciate you too.
See you later.